If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you won't miss any incredible stories based on real events. The autumn wind swept across the abandoned cotton fields of Millbrook Plantation in rural Georgia, carrying with it the weight of forgotten history and the earthy scent of soil that had absorbed too much pain. Dr. Marcus Williams, a 34-year-old African-American historian from Atlanta University, stood at the edge of what had once been one of the South's most notorious plantations. The moon hung full and bright above him, casting long shadows across the overgrown land that hadn't been cultivated in over 50 years, its silver light transforming the landscape into something both beautiful and haunting. Marcus had driven 3 hours from Atlanta after receiving a call from elderly Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, the last living descendant of the plantation's original owners. At 89, she claimed to have documents that would change everything people thought they knew about Millbrook. Her voice had trembled over the phone, heavy with secrets she'd carried for decades, secrets that had eaten away at her family's conscience like acid on metal. "Dr. Williams," she had said, her words barely audible through the static of the old rotary phone. "There's something buried in those fields that needs to be brought to light. Something my family tried to hide for generations. I'm dying, and I can't take these secrets with me to the grave." The conversation had lasted nearly an hour, with Eleanor revealing fragments of family stories that had been whispered in hushed tones for over a century. Stories of midnight burials, of records deliberately destroyed, of a family legacy built on lies and maintained through silence. She spoke of her great-great-grandmother's diary, hidden away in the plantation house for decades, containing truths that would shatter the sanitized version of history the Hartwell family had carefully constructed. Now, standing in the moonlight with a metal detector borrowed from the university's archaeology department, Marcus felt the familiar mixture of excitement and dread that came with uncovering painful truths. His grandmother had been born just 2 counties over, and her stories of the old plantations had shaped his career choice. She had told him tales passed down through generations of formerly enslaved people, stories that contradicted the official histories found in textbooks and museums. "The dead don't rest easy when their stories ain't told right," his grandmother used to say, her weathered hands gesturing toward the fields that surrounded their small farmhouse. "They keep calling out until somebody listens." This wasn't just academic research. It was personal, a continuation of his grandmother's mission to ensure that the voices of the silenced were finally heard. The old plantation house loomed in the distance, its white columns cracked and weathered, paint peeling like old scabs. Vines had claimed most of the structure, nature slowly reclaiming what human cruelty had built. The wraparound porch sagged under the weight of neglect, and several windows were boarded up with rotting plywood. Yet even in its decay, the house maintained an air of malevolent authority, as if the cruelties committed within its walls had seeped into the very foundation. Marcus had studied the historical records extensively. Millbrook had housed over 200 enslaved people at its peak in the 1850s, making it one of the largest plantations in the region. The Hartwell family had grown wealthy on cotton, their fortune built on the backs of people treated as property. Yet the official burial records showed only 12 graves in the designated slave cemetery, a small, neglected plot behind the main house marked by weathered wooden crosses and fieldstones. The mathematics didn't add up. Where were the others? In a population of 200 people living in harsh conditions with minimal medical care, the death rate would have been significantly higher. Disease, accidents, violence, and the general brutality of plantation life should have resulted in dozens of deaths over the plantation's 40-year operation. Mrs. Hartwell had given him a hand-drawn map, yellowed with age and brittle to the touch, showing an area about 200 yards behind the main house. The map was annotated in faded ink, with notes written in what appeared to be two different hands. "My great-great-grandfather's journal," she had explained, her hands shaking as she handed him the fragile papers. "He wrote about a man named Samuel, said he was buried where the moon could watch over his rest, whatever that meant. But there were others too, scattered across the property like seeds." The map showed not just one location, but 17 different sites marked with small X's and cryptic notations. Some were labeled with initials, others with dates, and a few bore the ominous notation, "Uprising Casualties." It was a treasure map of sorts, but instead of gold, it promised to reveal the hidden graves of people whose stories had been deliberately erased from history. Marcus activated the metal detector and began his systematic search, following the methodical grid pattern he had learned during his graduate studies in archaeology. The device remained silent for nearly an hour as he covered the designated area in careful, overlapping passes. The work was tedious, requiring patience and precision, but Marcus had learned that the most important discoveries often came to those willing to persist when others would give up. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of dying leaves and the faint, sweet smell of wild honeysuckle that had grown over the old slave quarters. Occasionally, he would hear the distant hoot of an owl or the rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. But otherwise, the plantation was eerily quiet, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Then, just as he was beginning to doubt the accuracy of the century-old map, the detector erupted in a series of sharp, insistent beeps. The sound cut through the silence like a scream, causing Marcus's heart to race with anticipation and dread. He knelt in the damp earth, his heart pounding against his ribs. Using a small archaeological trowel, he carefully scraped away layers of soil, documenting each level with photographs and notes. The earth was rich and dark, heavy with organic matter that spoke of decades of natural decomposition. About 18 inches down, his tool struck something hard. Not stone, metal. Working by the light of his headlamp, Marcus uncovered what appeared to be iron shackles, rusted but still intact. The metal was pitted and corroded, but the basic structure remained recognizable. These weren't just any shackles. They were still locked around what remained of human ankle bones, yellowed with age but unmistakably human. "Jesus," he whispered, sitting back on his heels, the magnitude of his discovery washing over him like a cold wave. The bones told a story of their own. The ankle bones showed signs of wear and damage consistent with prolonged use of heavy shackles. There were stress fractures that had healed poorly, indicating that this person had been chained for extended periods, possibly years. The shackles themselves were of a type Marcus had seen in museum collections, heavy iron restraints, used specifically for punishment or to prevent escape attempts. But there was more. Wrapped in what had once been oiled cloth, now mostly decomposed but still recognizable, was a small bundle. The cloth had been carefully folded and sealed with what appeared to be tree sap, creating a primitive but effective preservation method. Inside, Marcus found a collection of items that made his hands tremble with excitement and reverence. A wooden cross, carved with intricate African symbols that Marcus recognized from his studies of West African religious traditions. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each symbol carefully etched with a precision that spoke of both skill and devotion. A small leather pouch containing what looked like seeds, possibly from plants native to Africa, carefully preserved by someone who refused to let go of their homeland entirely. And most shocking of all, a folded piece of paper that had somehow survived the decades underground, protected by the oiled cloth and the careful preparation of whoever had buried it. The paper was fragile, brown with age, but the ink was still legible. It was a letter, written in careful, educated script that immediately told Marcus this was no ordinary enslaved person. The handwriting was that of someone who had received formal education, someone who could not only read and write, but do so with considerable skill. To whoever finds this, my name is Samuel Freeman. I was born free in Philadelphia, but stolen and sold into bondage at age 16. If you are reading this, then I am dead, and they have buried me in secret to hide their crime. I write this in the hope that someday someone will tell my story and the story of all who suffered here. Look for the others. We are not all in the cemetery they show to visitors. Some of us are scattered across these fields, buried where we fell, forgotten but not gone. Tell the world what happened at Millbrook. Tell them about the night of August 15th, 1859. Tell them about the uprising they tried to erase from history. My father's name is Marcus Freeman of Philadelphia. If he still lives, tell him his son died free in his heart, if not in his body. Samuel Freeman, son of Marcus Freeman, grandson of Kwame of the Gold Coast. Marcus's hands shook as he read the letter again, each word burning itself into his memory. August 15th, 1859. He knew that date. It was mentioned in several historical accounts as the night of disturbances at Millbrook, but the official records claimed it was nothing more than a barn fire caused by lightning. The incident had been dismissed as minor property damage, quickly repaired and forgotten. This letter suggested something far different, something that had been deliberately covered up and erased from the historical record. As he carefully photographed the letter and artifacts, Marcus noticed something else in the grave. Scratched into the metal of the shackles were tally marks, dozens of them, arranged in groups of 5 in the traditional counting method. Days, months, years of captivity marked in iron. The marks were deep and deliberate, carved with something sharp over what must have been a considerable period of time. The wind picked up, rustling through the overgrown cotton plants that still grew wild across the fields. In that sound, Marcus could almost hear voices, whispers of the past calling out to be remembered, stories demanding to be told after more than a century of silence. He looked up at the full moon, understanding now why Samuel had been buried where the moon could watch over his rest. This spot was the highest point in the fields, where the moon's light would shine brightest and longest. Someone had cared enough to give Samuel this small dignity, even in death. Someone had wanted him to be found, eventually when the time was right and the world was ready to hear his story. But who? And why had they buried him in secret, yet left clues for future discovery? Marcus carefully reburied the remains, marking the GPS coordinates for a proper archaeological excavation. But first, he needed to understand what had really happened on August 15th, 1859. The letter mentioned others buried across the fields. How many more graves were hidden beneath the Georgia soil? How many more stories were waiting to be uncovered? As he packed his equipment, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. Samuel Freeman had waited over 160 years for his story to be told. The least Marcus could do was make sure it was told right, told completely, and told in a way that honored not just Samuel, but all those who had suffered and died in silence. The drive back to Atlanta was filled with questions that demanded answers, each mile bringing new theories and possibilities. Who was Samuel Freeman? What uprising had the plantation owners tried to erase from history? And most importantly, how many other stories were buried in fields across the South, waiting for someone brave enough to dig them up and bring them into the light? 3 days later, Marcus sat in the climate-controlled archives of the Georgia Historical Society in Savannah, surrounded by boxes of documents that hadn't been opened in decades. The musty smell of old paper and leather bindings filled his nostrils as he carefully handled documents that were fragile with age. His discovery at Millbrook had consumed his thoughts. driving him to take emergency leave from his teaching duties to pursue the truth about Samuel Freeman and the mysterious events of August 15th, 1859. The official plantation records were frustratingly sparse, a deliberate omission that spoke volumes about what the Hartwell family had chosen to hide. The family had been meticulous about recording cotton yields, slave purchases, equipment maintenance, and financial transactions, but curiously silent about the people who made their wealth possible. Most enslaved individuals were listed only by first name and estimated age, treated as inventory rather than human beings with histories, families, and dreams. Marcus had requested every document related to Millbrook Plantation, and the archivists had wheeled out cart after cart of boxes, bills of sale that reduced human beings to monetary transactions, correspondence between plantation owners discussing the management of their human property, medical records that documented injuries and illnesses with clinical detachment, insurance policies that listed enslaved people alongside livestock and farm equipment. But Marcus had learned to read between the lines of such documents, to find the human stories hidden within the cold bureaucratic language. In the medical expenses, he found references to treating injuries from the disturbance and payments to Dr. Henry Morrison for emergency services rendered during the night of August 15th. In the correspondence with neighboring plantations, there were coded references to maintaining order, preventing the spread of dangerous ideas, and coordinating security measures. One letter from plantation owner Jeremiah Hartwell to his brother in Charleston caught Marcus's attention. Dated August 17, 1859, it was written in a shaky hand that suggested the author was deeply shaken by recent events. Dear brother, I write to inform you that we have experienced a most serious incident at Millbrook. The situation has been contained, though at considerable cost to both property and peace of mind. The ringleader has been dealt with permanently, and his body disposed of where it will not inspire further rebellion among the remaining population. I have instructed our overseer, Jenkins, to spread word that the troublemaker escaped north, though we both know the truth of the matter. The others involved have been sold to plantations in Mississippi and Alabama. Better to scatter them like leaves in the wind than risk another coordinated effort. I pray this incident serves as a lesson to any who might harbor similar thoughts of insurrection. The very idea that they could organize such a scheme under our noses is deeply troubling. We must be more vigilant in the future. I've also taken the precaution of increasing our security measures and have spoken with neighboring plantation owners about coordinating our efforts to prevent any similar incidents. The contagion of rebellion must not be allowed to spread. Please burn this letter after reading, as I do not wish these details to become public knowledge. The letter was dated August 20th, 1859, 5 days after the date mentioned in Samuel's hidden message. Marcus's pulse quickened as he realized he was reading a confession to murder, written in the careful language of a man trying to justify the unjustifiable. Dealt with permanently, and body disposed of, this had to be referring to Samuel Freeman. But what exactly had happened that night? What kind of coordinated effort had Samuel organized that so terrified the plantation owners? Marcus spent hours poring over shipping records, looking for evidence of the mass sale of enslaved people that Jeremiah Hartwell had mentioned. He found it in the records of slave traders operating out of Savannah, a large transaction dated August 25, 1859, involving the sale of 34 people from Millbrook Plantation to various buyers in Alabama and Mississippi. The ages ranged from 16 to 45, prime working age, exactly the demographic that would be involved in any organized resistance effort. The names on the bill of sale told their own story: families torn apart, children separated from parents, husbands and wives sold to different states, Marcus recognized some of the names from other plantation records, people who had been born at Millbrook, who had spent their entire lives on the property, suddenly uprooted and scattered across the Deep South as punishment for their association with Samuel Freeman. His breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While researching newspaper archives, Marcus discovered that the Savannah Morning News had run a small item on August 18, 1859, about a minor disturbance at a plantation in the interior. The article was brief and clearly sanitized, but it mentioned that order was restored by local authorities with the assistance of neighboring plantation owners, and that one agitator was killed while resisting arrest. The language was telling: agitator rather than slave, killed while resisting arrest rather than murdered. Even in death, Samuel Freeman was being denied his humanity by a press that served the interests of the plantation class. More revealing was what Marcus found in the personal diary of Dr. Henry Morrison, a physician who had been called to treat injuries at Millbrook. The diary, donated to the Historical Society by Morrison's descendants in the 1960s, contained detailed entries about his medical practice, including house calls to various plantations in the region. His entry for August 16, 1859, made Marcus's blood run cold. Called to Millbrook Plantation before dawn to treat injuries sustained during what Hartwell calls a minor incident. D. The scene that greeted me was anything but minor. Found 3 men with gunshot wounds, 2 women with severe lacerations from what appeared to be whip marks, and 1 child with a broken arm. The overseer, Jenkins, bore marks of a severe beating about his face and torso. Clearly, he had not emerged unscathed from whatever confrontation had occurred. When I inquired about the nature of the disturbance, Hartwell became evasive, saying only that a troublemaker had been dealt with, and that I was not to speak of what I had seen to anyone. The fear in the eyes of the enslaved people I treated told a different story than Hartwell's casual dismissal. These were not the injuries of a minor scuffle, but the aftermath of something far more serious. I observed that several buildings showed signs of damage: bullet holes in the walls of the overseer's quarters, broken windows in the main house, and what appeared to be bloodstains on the porch of the slave quarters. Whatever happened here, it was violent and sustained. The enslaved people I treated were too terrified to speak, but their injuries suggested they had fought back against their oppressors with considerable force. Something terrible happened at Millbrook, something that goes beyond the usual brutalities of plantation life. I fear I have witnessed the aftermath of a massacre, though I dare not speak such thoughts aloud. Marcus leaned back in his chair, pieces of the puzzle beginning to form a clearer picture. Samuel Freeman hadn't simply died. He had led some kind of organized resistance, been killed for it, and then secretly buried to prevent him from becoming a martyr to other enslaved people. The injuries Dr. Morrison described suggested a sustained battle, not a simple execution. But Marcus needed more evidence. He spent the next 2 days tracking down every document related to Millbrook Plantation, cross-referencing names and dates, building a comprehensive timeline of events. In the records of neighboring plantations, he found references to increased security measures implemented in late August 1859. Several plantations had purchased additional firearms, hired extra overseers, and implemented new restrictions on the movement of enslaved people. The Whitmore Plantation, located just 5 miles from Millbrook, had installed new locks on all slave quarters and implemented a system of night patrols. The Beauregard Plantation had purchased a pack of bloodhounds specifically trained for tracking runaway slaves. The Patterson Plantation had built a new jail specifically for housing troublemakers and agitators. The pattern suggested that whatever had happened at Millbrook had sent shockwaves through the entire region, creating a climate of fear among plantation owners who suddenly realized that their human property might be more organized and dangerous than they had previously believed. Marcus's most significant discovery came from an unlikely source, the diary of Sarah Hartwell, Jeremiah's wife. Her entries, written in a delicate script that spoke of education and refinement, revealed a woman tormented by what she had witnessed. Unlike her husband's careful euphemisms, Sarah's diary entries were raw and honest, filled with guilt and horror at the events she had been powerless to prevent. August 15th, 1859. I cannot sleep. The screaming has stopped, but it echoes still in my mind like the cries of the damned. Jeremiah says it was necessary, that Samuel was planning to murder us all in our beds, but I saw the man's eyes when they dragged him away. There was no madness there, no bloodlust, only a desperate desire for freedom that I recognize, because I have felt it myself, trapped as I am in this life of genteel brutality. How many more will die before this terrible institution ends? How many more graves will we dig in secret? How many more families will we tear apart in the name of order and profit? I am complicit in this evil, and I fear God's judgment will be swift and terrible. August 20th, 1859. They buried him in the far field, where Jeremiah says the moon can watch over him. I do not understand my husband's sudden poetry, but I am grateful Samuel was not thrown into the swamp like Jenkins suggested. Some small mercy in this ocean of cruelty. I watched from my window as they carried his body across the fields, wrapped in a simple cloth, and I wept for a man I barely knew, but whose dignity shone even in death. September 3rd, 1859. I have hidden Samuel's belongings in the root cellar, along with this diary and other documents that tell the true story of what happened here. Jeremiah ordered them burned, but I could not bear to destroy the last remnants of a man's life, his letter, his carved cross, the seeds he saved from his homeland. These things deserve to survive, even if their owner could not. Perhaps someday, when this madness ends, someone will find them and tell the world what really happened at Millbrook. Marcus's hands trembled as he read Sarah Hartwell's words. She had saved Samuel's belongings, hidden them away along with her own testimony. But where? The plantation house had been abandoned for decades. Could they still be there, waiting to be discovered? The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. A letter from Samuel Freeman himself, found among the papers of a Quaker family in Philadelphia who had been active in the Underground Railroad. The letter, dated July 1859, had been smuggled out of Millbrook by an unknown accomplice and revealed the full scope of Samuel's plans. Dear friends in Christ, I write to inform you that our plans proceed according to schedule. We have identified 37 souls ready to make the journey to freedom, including families with young children who deserve to grow up knowing liberty. The route has been mapped, supplies gathered, and contacts established along the way. I know the risks we face, but I also know that freedom is worth any price. We have lived too long in chains, watched too many of our people die in bondage, seen too many children born into slavery. If we do not act now, when will we? If we do not fight for our freedom, who will? I ask only that if something happens to me, you will remember that we died as free men and women in our hearts, even if our bodies remained in chains. Tell the world that we were not content to accept our bondage, that we fought for the same liberty that all men claim as their birthright. Your brother in the struggle for freedom, Samuel Freeman. Marcus sat in stunned silence, the weight of Samuel's words settling over him like a shroud. This wasn't just the story of one man's death, it was the story of a carefully planned escape attempt that had been betrayed, leading to a massacre that was then covered up and erased from history. He made a decision that would change everything. Instead of returning to Atlanta, Marcus drove back to Millbrook Plantation. This time, he would search not just the fields, but the house itself. If Sarah Hartwell had hidden evidence in the root cellar, it might still be there, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover the truth. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell met him at the front gate, her aged face creased with worry and anticipation. "Dr. Williams, I've been thinking about our conversation. There are things I should have told you. Family secrets that have been eating away at us for generations. Things my grandmother made me swear never to speak of. Mrs. Hartwell, I found Samuel Freeman's grave, and I found his letter." The old woman's face went pale, and she gripped her cane with trembling hands. "Then you know." "I know there was an uprising. I know your ancestor had Samuel killed and buried in secret. But I need to know the whole truth. What really happened that night?" Eleanor Hartwell looked toward the abandoned house, her eyes filled with the weight of generations of family secrets. The setting sun cast long shadows across the overgrown grounds, and for a moment the plantation looked exactly as it must have on that terrible night in 1859. "Come inside, Dr. Williams," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's time you learned about the night that changed everything." The interior of the Millbrook Plantation house was a tomb of memories, each room holding the echoes of conversations that had shaped the course of human lives. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight that filtered through broken shutters, and the air carried the musty scent of decades of abandonment mixed with something else, the lingering presence of secrets too long kept. Eleanor Hartwell moved slowly through the rooms, her cane tapping against warped floorboards as she led Marcus deeper into the house, past portraits of stern-faced ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow their movements with disapproval. The main hallway was lined with faded wallpaper that had once been elegant, depicting scenes of pastoral beauty that stood in stark contrast to the harsh realities of plantation life. Family photographs in tarnished silver frames showed generations of Hartwells, their faces bearing the confident expressions of people who had never questioned their right to own other human beings. Marcus noticed that none of the photographs included the enslaved people who had made the family's wealth possible. They had been erased from the visual record just as thoroughly as they had been erased from the written one. "My great-great-grandmother Sarah kept a detailed record of everything," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper as they passed through rooms that had once hosted elegant dinner parties and social gatherings. "Not just the sanitized version my family told for generations, but the truth, the real truth about what happened here, what we did, what we allowed to happen." She hid it all in the root cellar, along with Samuel's belongings and other evidence that would have destroyed our family's reputation if it had ever come to light. They descended narrow wooden stairs into the basement, where the temperature dropped noticeably, and the air grew thick with the smell of earth and decay. Eleanor produced an old oil lamp from a shelf near the stairs, its flame casting dancing shadows on the stone walls that had been carved from the Georgia bedrock. In its flickering light, Marcus could see stone walls lined with empty shelves that had once stored the plantation's food supplies, wine, and other provisions needed to maintain the lifestyle of the plantation elite. The basement was larger than Marcus had expected, extending under most of the main house. He could see evidence of its former use: wine racks built into the walls, storage areas for root vegetables, and what appeared to be a small workshop where tools and equipment had been maintained. But in the far corner, behind a loose stone that Eleanor indicated with a trembling finger, was a metal box that had been hidden for over 160 years. "I found this when I was 12, Eleanor said, her hands shaking as she opened the box with a key she wore on a chain around her neck. "My grandmother caught me reading it and made me swear never to tell anyone. She said it would destroy our family's reputation, that people wouldn't understand the context of the times, that we would be judged by modern standards for actions taken in a different era, but reputations built on lies deserve to be destroyed. Don't they, Dr. Williams?" Inside the box, Marcus found treasures beyond his wildest expectations. Sarah Hartwell's complete diary, spanning from 1855 to 1865, bound in leather that had been carefully preserved with oils and wrapped in oiled cloth. Samuel Freeman's personal belongings, the carved wooden cross, the leather pouch of seeds, and several letters he had written but never sent, including what appeared to be correspondence with Underground Railroad conductors and abolitionists in the North. Most remarkably, there was a detailed map drawn by Samuel himself, showing not only the locations of secret graves across the plantation grounds, but also escape routes, hiding places, safe houses, and contact points for the Underground Railroad network. The map was a masterpiece of strategic planning, showing a level of organization and intelligence that completely contradicted the official portrayal of enslaved people as simple, uneducated laborers, incapable of complex thought or planning. But it was Sarah's final diary entry about the uprising that revealed the full horror of what had happened, written in a hand that shook with emotion and moral anguish. August 15th, 1859. I must record the truth, for history will surely lie about this night, and someone must bear witness to what really happened here. Samuel Freeman was not a violent man seeking to murder innocent people, as Jeremiah now claims. He was a leader, a man who could read and write better than most white men I know, who spoke of freedom not through bloodshed, but through escape, through the careful coordination of a mass exodus that would have taken 37 souls away from this place of torment. For months, he had been organizing what he called the Great Departure, not an uprising in the traditional sense, but a coordinated escape that would have been the largest single group to attempt the journey north from our region. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. On the night of the new moon, when darkness would provide maximum cover, they would slip away from Millbrook in small groups and make their way to predetermined meeting points, then travel together along established Underground Railroad routes to freedom. Samuel had made contact with conductors in Savannah through a network of free blacks and sympathetic whites. They had saved money by selling small items and doing extra work, gathered supplies by slowly accumulating food and clothing, and planned their route with the precision of a military campaign. They had even arranged for false papers and safe houses along the way. But Jenkins, our overseer, discovered the plan through treachery. One of the enslaved people, terrified of the consequences if the escape failed, revealed the plot to Jenkins in exchange for promises of better treatment. Jenkins had been suspicious of Samuel for weeks, watching him, following him, noting his movements and conversations. On the afternoon of August 15th, Jenkins found the hidden supplies in the old tobacco barn and confronted Samuel as he was conducting what appeared to be a final meeting with the other conspirators. What happened next will haunt me until my dying day. Jenkins demanded that Samuel reveal the names of all conspirators and the details of their escape plan. When Samuel refused, Jenkins began beating him with a leather strap, the same one he used to punish field hands for minor infractions. Still, Samuel would not betray his people, even as the blood ran down his back and his knees buckled from the pain. Jeremiah arrived as the beating escalated, drawn by the sounds of violence and Jenkins's shouted demands for information. Instead of stopping the brutality, my husband grabbed his pistol from the house and returned to the barn. "Tell me who else is involved," he demanded, pressing the barrel of the gun against Samuel's temple, "or I'll shoot you where you stand and make examples of everyone in the quarters until someone talks." Samuel looked my husband in the eye, his face bloodied but his dignity intact, and said words I will never forget. "I am already dead, Mr. Hartwell. You made sure of that the day you bought me like a piece of livestock. But my people will be free with or without me. You can kill my body, but you cannot kill the idea of freedom." Jeremiah shot him, not in anger, not in the heat of passion, but coldly, deliberately, as if he were putting down a rabid dog. Samuel fell to his knees, blood spreading across his shirt, but he did not cry out. He did not beg for mercy or plead for his life. He simply closed his eyes and whispered what sounded like a prayer in a language I did not recognize, perhaps the language of his ancestors, calling them to welcome him home. But the gunshot had been heard throughout the quarters. The other enslaved people came running, thinking there had been an accident or that someone needed help. When they saw Samuel dying in the barn, several of them attacked Jenkins and Jeremiah with farming tools, hoes, shovels, anything they could find. In the chaos that followed, more shots were fired. 3 people were killed, including a woman named Ruth, who had been Samuel's closest friend and fellow organizer, and a teenage boy named Isaac, who tried to shield her body with his own. The violence spread to the quarters as other enslaved people, hearing the gunshots and seeing their friends killed, began to fight back with a fury born of decades of oppression. Windows were broken, buildings were damaged, and for a brief, terrifying moment, it seemed as though the natural order of the plantation might be overturned entirely. The survivors were beaten into submission by Jenkins and the field hands Jeremiah had armed with rifles. By dawn, the rebellion was crushed, but not before word had been sent to neighboring plantations. Armed men from 5 plantations arrived by sunrise, and the surviving conspirators were loaded onto wagons and sold to traders heading west. Their families torn apart as punishment for their association with Samuel's escape plan. Samuel died slowly, taking nearly an hour to succumb to his wounds. His last words were to ask that someone tell his father in Philadelphia that he had died free in his heart, if not in his body, and that the seeds of freedom he had planted would someday grow into a mighty tree. We buried him in the far field, not out of respect, but to hide the evidence of murder. Jeremiah chose the spot because it was the highest point on the plantation, visible from the slave quarters, a reminder to others of what happened to those who dreamed of freedom. But I think Samuel would have approved of the location. From there, he could watch over the fields where he had labored, and the moon could watch over him in return. I am complicit in this evil. I watched it happen and did nothing to stop it. I could have intervened, could have spoken out, could have refused to participate in the cover-up that followed. Instead, I remained silent, protecting my comfort and social position while good people died for the crime of wanting to be free. I can only pray that someday, someone will find this record and tell the world what really happened to Samuel Freeman and the others who died, for the simple desire to live as human beings rather than property. Marcus sat in stunned silence, the weight of Sarah's confession settling over him like a shroud. This wasn't just the story of one man's death. It was the story of a systematic cover-up that had erased dozens of people from history, a carefully orchestrated campaign to hide evidence of both organized resistance and mass murder. Eleanor Hartwell watched his face in the lamplight, her own features etched with the guilt of generations. "There's more," she said quietly, reaching deeper into the box. Samuel's map shows 17 different burial sites across the plantation, each one marked with the name and story of the person buried there. My family has known about them for generations, but we've never told anyone. We've been living on a graveyard, Dr. Williams, and pretending it was just farmland. Marcus studied Samuel's hand-drawn map, noting the careful detail with which he had marked not just burial sites, but escape routes, hiding places, safe houses, and contact points for the Underground Railroad network. This man had been a brilliant strategist and organizer, not the violent rebel the official records portrayed. The map showed a level of planning and coordination that rivaled military operations, with contingency plans, alternate routes, and detailed intelligence about local geography and sympathetic contacts. Each burial site on the map was annotated with information about the person buried there. Ruth Washington, age 34, shot while protecting the children. Isaac Thompson, age 16, died shielding Ruth's body. Moses Jenkins, no relation to the overseer, age 28, beaten to death for refusing to reveal escape plans. Mary Freeman, age 31, died of grief 3 days after Samuel's death. Mrs. Hartwell, why are you telling me this now? Why break a family silence that's lasted over 160 years? The old woman's eyes filled with tears, and her voice broke as she answered, "Because I'm dying, Dr. Williams. Cancer. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months left. And I can't take these secrets to my grave. My family built their wealth on the backs of enslaved people, then spent generations lying about how those people lived and died. We've been cowards, hiding behind social respectability, while the truth rotted away in this basement." She handed him a thick folder filled with legal documents, deeds, and official papers. "I'm donating the entire plantation to your university, Dr. Williams. All 800 acres, the house, everything. I want it turned into a memorial and research center. I want every grave found, every story told, every lie exposed. I want the world to know what happened here. And I want the people who died here to finally receive the dignity and recognition they were denied in life." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he realized the magnitude of what Eleanor was offering. This wasn't just a generous donation, it was an act of moral courage that would transform how people understood the history of slavery in Georgia and across the South. "Mrs. Hartwell, this is incredible, but why me? Why trust me with something this important?" "Because you're the first person who cared enough to dig. You're the first person who looked at that field and saw people instead of property. You're the first person who understood that Samuel Freeman's story needed to be told, not hidden away like a family shame. Samuel waited 164 years for someone like you to find him." As they climbed back up from the root cellar, Marcus's mind raced with the implications of what he had learned. This wasn't just a historical discovery, it was a complete rewriting of the narrative around one of Georgia's most notorious plantations. But more than that, it was a reminder that beneath the soil of the American South lay thousands of untold stories. Thousands of people whose lives and deaths had been deliberately erased from the historical record. Samuel Freeman's story was just the beginning. With Eleanor's donation and the evidence she had preserved, Marcus would have the resources and documentation needed to conduct the most comprehensive investigation of plantation life and resistance ever undertaken in Georgia. The truth about Millbrook would finally come to light, and with it, the stories of all those who had been forgotten. Samuel Freeman's story was just the beginning of a much larger reckoning with the hidden history of American slavery. 6 months later, Millbrook Plantation had been transformed from a site of hidden horrors into a beacon of historical truth and reconciliation. The university's archaeology team, led by Marcus and funded by a coalition of historical societies, civil rights organizations, and private donors, had uncovered 14 additional graves across the property, each one revealing new pieces of the puzzle that was antebellum plantation life. The excavations had been conducted with the reverence and scientific rigor that the victims deserved, with each grave carefully documented, photographed, and analyzed by forensic anthropologists who could read the stories written in bone and artifact. The discovery had made international news, with major newspapers, television networks, and online media outlets running extensive features about the plantation that hid its dead, and the underground railroad plot that history forgot. Odile, documentary filmmakers, had already begun production on a feature-length film about Samuel Freeman's story, and several major universities had launched similar investigations at plantation sites across the South. But for Marcus, the media attention was secondary to the real work of honoring the people who had been forgotten and ensuring that their stories would never again be erased from history. The transformation of Millbrook had been remarkable. Where once there had been overgrown fields and a decaying mansion, there now stood a state-of-the-art research center and memorial complex. The main building housed archives, research facilities, and exhibition spaces that told the complete story of plantation life, not just the sanitized version found in most history books, but the full truth of both the brutality of slavery and the remarkable courage of those who resisted it. The centerpiece of the complex was the memorial garden, where each of the 17 graves identified by Samuel's map had been marked with a granite headstone bearing the person's name, age, and a brief description of their life and death. The headstones were arranged in a circle around a central monument, a bronze statue of Samuel Freeman holding the letter he had hidden in his grave, his face turned toward the North Star that had guided so many freedom seekers. On a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after his first visit to Millbrook, Marcus stood before a crowd of over 500 people gathered for the dedication of the Samuel Freeman Memorial and Research Center. Among the attendees were descendants of enslaved people from Millbrook and surrounding plantations, historians and researchers from across the country, civil rights leaders, government officials, and members of the Hartwell family who had chosen to embrace the truth rather than hide from it. The crowd was diverse in every sense, young and old, black and white, academics and activists, locals and visitors from around the world. Many carried flowers to place on the graves, while others held photographs of ancestors who had been enslaved on plantations throughout the South. The atmosphere was solemn but hopeful, marked by a sense that justice was finally being served after more than a century of denial and cover-up. Eleanor Hartwell, now confined to a wheelchair but still sharp as ever, had insisted on speaking at the ceremony despite her declining health. Her voice was weak but clear as she addressed the crowd, her words carrying the weight of generations of family guilt finally being acknowledged and addressed. For over 160 years, my family kept terrible secrets. We told ourselves we were protecting our reputation, preserving our legacy, maintaining our place in society. But we were really protecting our shame, hiding our complicity in a system of unimaginable cruelty. Today, we choose truth over comfort, justice over reputation, healing over hiding. The people buried in these fields were not property. They were human beings with names, families, dreams, and an unbreakable desire for freedom. It's time their stories were told, their courage recognized, their dignity restored. The crowd listened in respectful silence as Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. I cannot undo the wrongs my family committed, but I can ensure that the truth is finally told. I can make sure that Samuel Freeman and all the others who died here are remembered not as victims, but as heroes who fought for the most basic human right, the right to be free. Marcus had spent months researching the identities of the people buried at Millbrook, using Samuel's map, Sarah Hartwell's diary, and records from other plantations to piece together their stories. Each person represented not just an individual tragedy, but a family destroyed, a community torn apart, a life cut short by the violence inherent in the system of slavery. Ruth Washington, 34, had been Samuel's closest friend and fellow organizer of the escape attempt. Born on a plantation in South Carolina, she had been sold to Millbrook as a teenager and had spent nearly 20 years planning and dreaming of freedom. She had been shot while trying to protect the children in the slave quarters during the chaos following Samuel's murder. Her body found shielding 3 young children from the violence. Isaac Thompson, 16, had been born at Millbrook and had never known freedom. His parents had died when he was young, and he had been raised by the community of enslaved people who became his extended family. His crime was loyalty. He had died trying to shield Ruth's body from further violence, refusing to abandon his friend even when faced with armed overseers. Mary Freeman, no relation to Samuel, 28, had been sold away from her 3 young children as punishment for her involvement in the escape plan. According to records Marcus had tracked down, she had died 2 years later on a plantation in Alabama, her heart broken by separation from her children and the failure of the freedom attempt she had helped plan. Moses Jenkins, 31, had been the plantation's blacksmith, a skilled craftsman who had used his position to forge tools and weapons for the escape attempt. He had been beaten to death for refusing to reveal the location of the weapons cache, dying without betraying his fellow conspirators, even under the most brutal torture. Each grave now bore a marker with the person's name, age, and a brief description of their life and death. But the centerpiece of the memorial was Samuel Freeman's grave, marked with a granite headstone that bore his own words, "Tell the world what happened at Millbrook." Below that, in smaller text, was the inscription, "Samuel Freeman, 1823–1859, born free, died fighting for freedom. His courage lights the way for all who seek justice." The research center housed not only the artifacts found in the graves, but also an extensive collection of documents, photographs, oral histories, and interactive exhibits related to slavery in Georgia and the broader South. Sarah Hartwell's diary was displayed in a place of honor, her words serving as a reminder that even those who benefited from slavery could choose to bear witness to its horrors and work toward justice. But perhaps the most powerful element of the memorial was the Wall of Names, a black granite monument listing the names of all 247 people who had been enslaved at Millbrook between 1820 and 1865. For many visitors, seeing the names carved in stone was the first time they truly understood the scale of human suffering that had occurred on this land. Each name represented a life, a story, a family, a dream deferred or destroyed by the institution of slavery. Marcus had also established an ongoing research project called the Hidden Graves Initiative, working to locate and identify unmarked slave graves throughout Georgia and the broader South. Using ground-penetrating radar, historical records, oral histories, and archaeological techniques, teams of researchers were working to map the true extent of hidden burial sites across the region. The project had already identified over 300 potential grave sites at plantations across 5 states, each discovery bringing new stories to light, new names to remember, new truths to confront. Universities across the South had launched similar investigations, creating a network of researchers dedicated to uncovering the hidden history of American slavery. The work was painstaking and often heartbreaking. Many of the graves contained the remains of children, victims of disease, malnutrition, and violence. Others held the bodies of people who had died attempting to escape, their dreams of freedom cut short by slave catchers, bloodhounds, and the brutal realities of the antebellum South. But each discovery also revealed evidence of resistance, community, and unbreakable human spirit. Hidden caches of personal belongings, secret meeting places, coded messages, and carefully preserved cultural artifacts all testified to the fact that enslaved people had never accepted their bondage passively. They had maintained their humanity, their dignity, and their hope for freedom even under the most oppressive conditions. As the dedication ceremony concluded, Marcus found himself standing alone at Samuel Freeman's grave as the sun set over the Georgia fields. The autumn air was crisp and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The memorial garden was illuminated by soft lighting that made the granite headstones glow like beacons in the gathering darkness. "We found them, Samuel," he said quietly, his voice carrying across the peaceful grounds. "We found your people, and we told their stories. The world knows what happened here now. The truth is finally free." A gentle breeze rustled through the cotton plants that still grew wild at the edges of the fields, the same plants that Samuel and the others had tended under the brutal Georgia sun. But now those fields served a different purpose. They were a classroom, a memorial. a place where the truth could finally be spoken without fear or shame. Marcus thought about the letter Samuel had hidden in his grave, the desperate hope that someday someone would tell his story. That hope had sustained Samuel through his final moments, and it had waited patiently in the Georgia soil for someone willing to listen, to dig, to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The full moon rose over Millbrook Plantation, casting its silver light across the memorial markers that now dotted the landscape. Samuel Freeman and his fellow freedom seekers were no longer hidden in unmarked graves, their stories erased from history. Their names were carved in stone, their courage celebrated, their dignity restored after more than a century of silence and denial. As Marcus walked back toward the research center, he carried with him the weight of responsibility that came with being a keeper of these stories. There were thousands more Samuel Freemans buried in unmarked graves across the South, thousands more stories waiting to be told, thousands more families seeking answers about ancestors who had simply vanished from the historical record. The work was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. But tonight, under the same moon that had watched over Samuel's secret burial so many years ago, Marcus felt the satisfaction of a promise kept and a mission begun. The truth had finally come to light, and the dead could rest knowing they would not be forgotten. In the distance, the old plantation house stood silhouetted against the night sky, no longer a symbol of hidden shame, but a testament to the power of truth to transform even the darkest chapters of history into lessons for the future. The house would soon be converted into additional research space and educational facilities, ensuring that the work of uncovering hidden history would continue for generations to come. Samuel Freeman's nighttime screams no longer haunted the fields of Millbrook Plantation. Instead, the wind carried whispers of remembrance, stories of courage, and the eternal human desire for freedom that no amount of cruelty could ever truly bury. The truth had set them free at last, and their legacy would inspire future generations to continue the work of justice, reconciliation, and historical honesty. The memorial would stand as a permanent reminder that the past cannot be buried forever, that truth has a way of rising to the surface, and that the courage of those who fought for freedom, even in the face of certain death, can never be truly silenced. Samuel Freeman and his fellow freedom seekers had finally received the recognition they deserved, and their stories would continue to inspire all those who believe in the fundamental human right to be free. So, what did you think of this story based on real events? If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that reveal hidden truths from our history. Ring that notification bell so you won't miss any new content. See you in the next story.